or a withdrawal ethic, but a reminder that Christians must serve the world on their own terms. Otherwise, the world would have no means to know itself as the world.
Thank you. I think that's quite helpful in view of our previous conversation. Okay, what did you make of this text? Fabulous piece of writing, I think. I hope you enjoyed it. Some of you did, good. So what did you make of it? What's he trying to say? And
which page was you reading, please?
Page 10.
Page 10, thank
At
you.
the bottom.
Okay.
I really liked it and thought it was a beautiful sort of way to be. But my reservations about it was I thought because he's talking about a narrative that we should engage with, become part of, but I thought, what if people don't want to, which actually is probably the majority of the country, you know. What you've got this narrative. I mean, we were talking this morning, perhaps it's because we don't make the narrative as it should be, so it's therefore not attractive. But I'm not entirely convinced about that. I wonder whether even if it was a good narrative, I'm still not entirely convinced people would choose to join it.
Yep. Okay, so there's a fundamental flaw here in that we can't out-narrate to such an extent that this can be universal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's...
Isn't Hauerwas saying that it's not about being didactic, it's not about saying, do this, it's just about doing,
being.
and being. You know, well, yes.
Yeah.
So it's just about getting on and being what God intended the church, the body of Christ, to be. And trusting that just by being.
Yeah.
So we're not saying, you must do this, this is our story, look, this is our story, do it like this, it's just do it.
Yeah.
And people will see and...
Yeah, I think Ness is saying that actually she doesn't think people will see it and think, golly!
I don't know, I think if we do it authentically, I think if we do it properly...
I think if you look at things like the Occupy movement a few years ago down at St Paul's, you know, nobody thought that it was going to turn out the way that it did. And it captured a truth in society, and people from all walks of life turned up at the church expecting actually the church to support them.
But that was not universalisable, and I think the point that Ness is making, though I ought to let her speak for herself, is that this is not something universalisable. So there has to be another kind of ethical stance that society can agree with, otherwise all else confusion, to quote that lovely poem about women keeping in their place. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and it's kind of like say St Paul's was a narrative that people stepped into, but then they've withdrawn from it. So it's sort of, I think you get glimpses of it, and I think that, I hate to use the word, but it's almost like making church attractive, and that isn't totally what I mean, but in a way, it's like, oh, if we make the narrative as it should be, it will then be attractive and people will join. But I'm not convinced that people will join, even if it's as good as it should be.
And this may reflect his US context, where churches of many thousands and thousands of denominations, because they're really good at splitting in the US, would be more open to hearing this than a rather post-church.
I wonder if but I think his context is more like the kind of original Warren that's kind of forgotten the significance of its story, but still knows the story. Whereas I wonder if our context is more like the Warren that has no name. And the reaction is people tell a story, and the reaction is, well, that's very nice, but stories don't really mean anything. Why should your story have more significance than any other sort of story? It's kind of more the response. And in that scenario, you can't out-narrate, because the power of the narration is kind of, that's a nice story, but I don't respond to stories.
And I guess the story that both here and in the States, which is the predominant story, and in many of our churches is part of the Christian story, or people think it is the story of consumer capitalism. It is that world that we have somehow bought into, and I find it horrifying that I ask children who are 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, or I don't actually ask them, but I overhear other people asking them what they want to do when they grow up. I mean, it's a ridiculous question to ask anyone under 60, but I've heard children say they want to be celebrities. Well, you know, there's something really odd that we live in a world where that is so dominant. I mean, when I was little, which was a long time ago, people wanted to be school teachers and doctors and occasionally prime ministers, but they didn't want to be celebrities. They occasionally wanted to be musicians, but they didn't want to be celebrities. And you know, we have created a narrative that people are buying into.
I wonder if that's because it's now become more individual excellence to be excelled, whereas when it's the story is making the community excel. Being a doctor or being a teacher is a great thing because you're helping build up the community. Now where the story children are told is to be individual and be to the best you can be as an individual is to be a celebrity, to be celebrated for who you are as an individual.
So there are some reservations around this. What else? Some of you really liked it. Were some of you convinced by it as well?
We were talking about how a story formed the tradition and how they had to keep retelling the story to keep the tradition going.
Yes.
And then we were moaning so on. And then that frustrates the argument that it's always done like this.
Yes.
Stories, when people short circuit what they think tradition really is.
Yes. So the story is reinterpreted as the new generation lives it, and retold rather than and will be extended.
To go back to Nessa's point about how universal it could become, in Hauerwas' own mind, is he bothered about that so much as he's just trying to call the church to its true integrity of its identity, that they just have to be, so it's not about church growth or community relevance in a way that
it's kind of relevant to church growth, but not as an obsession. In that he thinks more people will join us if they see that we live in a particular way.
But that's not the primary reason.
No, and he's and there's a sense in which, I mean, I think to say he's not bothered is too strong, but no, he's interested in his main purpose, and I think quite rightly, in a sense, in that one has to focus one's energies somewhere, is to put across this message.
How does he get around the fact that if he wants to say, right, this ethically is how we behave as Christians, so we've got the best story, so we should know how to be best behaved and whatever else, and yet knowing that will not be widely embraced in the world, and he's not for a lot of political activism out there. Does he tell the rest of the world, you have to form your ethics, and
No.
he still expects him to adopt Christian ethics?
Just this bit leaps out at me when we think of that. Page 16. It is tempting to reduce this story to its obvious etiological elements. Why rabbits have white tails and strong legs, but this would distort the importance of the story as the source of skills for rabbits to negotiate their world. The rabbit's task is not to try to make the world safe, but rather to learn to live in a dangerous world by trusting in stories, speed, wit, and each other's gifts. Rabbit's existence in the world is contingent upon the utilisation of the lessons learned from the story of their origin and the gifts provided by Frith.
Thank you, that's helpful.
And that as well kind of taps in a bit to what Ness said. So I've marked something down that stood out for me, because I thought similar to you, Ness, about the hope of people
joining into and embracing Christian narrative. But it says that what you've done is primarily a novel about the various forms of courage and hope necessary for the formation of a good community. And further on it says, such hope does not necessarily take the form of excessive confidence. Rather, it involves a simple willingness to take the next step. So I think that's really key there. So it's not about necessarily having the expectation that everyone will embrace our narrative, but being confident enough to own it.
Yeah.
And resonates a bit with Bonhoeffer,
It
doesn't
does.
it? It's this,
It really does.
you know, throw yourself upon the mercy of God and take the next step and act. Interesting one. Let's look at another place in page 10, 1.3. And his commentary on thesis 1.3. No society can be just or good that is built on falsehood. The first task of Christian social ethics, therefore, is not to make the world better or more just. Have we just read this? No. Just read this? No. But to help Christian people form their community consistent with their conviction that the story of Christ is a truthful account of our existence. For as H. Richard Niebuhr argues, only when we know what is going on do we know what we should do. And Christians believe that we learn most decisively what is going on in the cross and resurrection of Christ. So it's this sense that there is something quite different going on in the world than consumer capitalism. And not everybody realises that. So there's a slightly...
Because consumer capitalism is actually not such a bad thing if you live in it and you don't question it.
Well, it may not seem a bad thing.
Yeah.
It may not seem a bad thing. I think it is profoundly damaging to people.
It is, but if you don't...
you may not be, individuals may not be aware of that, yes. But that is one of the areas in which I personally feel we can out-narrate our society.
Definitely.
But this sense that there's something quite different going on.
And it almost says that, following on, because it says we live in a world of powers that are not in our creation.
Yeah.
And we become determined by them when we lack the ability not to recognise them.
Yeah. So when we come back to look at evil, we will look at some of that.
And the story that we have, the Christian story, is not a safe one.
No, absolutely.
And if you've grown up in a capitalist, consumerist society,
it's very unsafe.
It's very unsafe. But the hope is that we follow the way of the cross, don't we?
Yes. Yes. So again, Bonhoeffer, the cheap grace and the costly grace stuff. Can I point you to page 14? This very important paragraph above the story-shaped world of rabbits, which begins, Adams is trying to help us understand politics, but also as it forms them to be inheritors and exemplifications of a tradition. In other words, Adams suggests that society can best be understood as an extended argument, since living traditions presuppose rival interpretations. Good societies enable the argument to continue so that the possibilities and limits of a tradition can be exposed. The great danger, however, is that the success of a tradition will stop its growth, and in reaction, some may deny the necessity of tradition for their lives. The truthfulness of a tradition is tested in its ability to form people who are ready to put the tradition into question. Isn't that interesting? Or at least to recognise when it is being put into question by a rival tradition. Of course, as we shall see, some traditions lapse into complete incoherence and can be recovered only by revolutionary reconstitution. But the sense that if the sign that the tradition is still alive is that there's a discussion going on. So the tradition is not, as it were, set in stone, but is one which adapts and evolves and tells itself slightly differently. Does that ring any bells to people?
Jewish tradition.
Yeah, it is.
Very much
Midrash.
McIntyre's conclusion as well.
Yeah.
He said, we did that lecture about, a tradition is dead when it's no longer being discussed. When people in tradition are no longer discussing what that tradition means.
Yeah. very interesting that one of the things that some of our churches are saying is that we want to hold our tradition in aspic. Yeah. Anything else? I'm aware of time fastly moving on. People pick up a lot of resonances from McIntyre in this. I think it's a very McIntyre type text. The issue of safety is very important. Strangers in the community. Anything else anyone wants to raise that was of particular significance?
I think this is an interesting bit.
Yeah.
Where that's what, page 21. The silverweed recited his poem, fire became increasingly. Sorry. Yes, as Silverweed recited his poem, Fiver became increasingly nervous and finally caused a stir by bolting out of the warren. Hazel joined him and Fiver again emphasised that they must leave because Silverweed spoke the truth for this warren, that rabbits in such a warren must learn to accept death. Hazel and Bigwig ignored this warning, however, since they continued to think that the warren might make a good permanent home.
So what's important?
And that, well, in a sense, it reflects church.
Yeah.
And his overall view about church becoming what church should be, which we are nowhere near, is inherent in here, really.
Yeah.
You know, let's make a good permanent home, and we can stay nice and safe, and we'll all be together, and nobody can rock the boat, and we'll all be okay until we die.
Yeah.
It just sort of speaks into today's issue.
And is again Fiver being very empathetic.
Yes. Makes a whole different meaning of putting Fiver in collective.
Thank you for that, Susan. Right. Anything else anyone want to pick up? What did you make of this piece stuff?
Yes.
4.2 on page 33. Peace, as has often been pointed out, is not the absence of disorder and cannot be built on justice.
I think that's true.
That's true. It's what is truth. It's how do we get to truth? And Pippa and I were saying about I've just had a complaint thrown out by the ASA, and they haven't gone to look at what the truth is. They've gone to look at what the facts are.
Yeah.
And the facts are not always what the truth is. In order to uncover a truth, you need to have 2, 3, 4, a group of people come together to uncover what the truth about a certain thing is.
So again, another emphasis upon communitarianism and peace as something that emerges from this.
And a necessity.
Yeah.
In order for peace to exist, it's a necessary thing.
Yeah.
That this takes place. It's this bit about not built on lies. And if peace is built on truth, for ultimately order, which is the opposite of a peaceful kingdom, is built on lies and must resort to coercion.
I wonder whether, you know, I was saying about people not joining the narrative. I wonder whether part of it is people who do come to church, some of them come because they think it will be a removal from upheaval. And actually, the Christian faith is not that at all. And perhaps there's a sense of disappointment or something like that. So they think, oh, I'm actually at more peace buying my whatever because that will make me happy for a few minutes. I think in a way I wonder whether they never get to the peace because they're sort of wanting a removal of anything bad, and that won't happen.
Yeah. The church becomes a place to bury our heads in the sand and pretend life is not like it is.
Or that we could leave behind what life used to be like.
Okay, how are rabbits relevant to Christian social ethics? Was this helpful at all?
That's very good.
Well, I'm to go on reflecting on it. I know one or two of you have said you're going to go back and read Watership Down now, or watch the movie. So, thank you, madam. So, I'm going to go and sit in the corner if anyone wants to come and talk to me on the naughty chair. And anyone who wants to come and talk to me about their assignment may do so. Otherwise, who is doing War and Peace next week, or whatever it's called? Right, thank you. You would like to join into a group and talk about how you're going to present this together. Who's doing euthanasia?
And Joe as well.
Yeah, you know that, so please be in touch with Joe. Who's doing same-sex marriage? And who is doing money? Excellent. So if you'd like to get into your groups,